Hi, welcome to the Diablo podcast. We are online at diabloincgamers.com. I am your host, Flux, and I am joined this week by a she, and by she I mean our old favorite. It's...
me.
It's Paul. Paul's on the show this week.
Me, Rush.
It's Rush, yes, of course. No, it's Elly, back by popular demand. You people keep posting in comment threads. How come it's only Flux and Xanth? Where's Elly? Where's Elly? Well, here she is. She was suggested yesterday. Jay Wilson has left the company, left Diablo 3 as his game director post, and Elly said, hey, we should do a podcast about that. And I said, by we, do you mean you? And she said, yes. So here we are.
Yep, to comment on the shocking news.
Yeah, so we should obviously say what the shocking news was. Jay Wilson announced yesterday that he's leaving his game director position at Diablo 3, and he posted a forum thread about that. You want to summarize what he said, Elly?
I'm moving on to another game.
And he was fired and cruelly kicked to the curb, right?
He didn't really say too much.
He said resign. He didn't say fired. And he's moving on to another project at Blizzard. People are assuming that's probably Titan, or whatever they're calling it now. And before he worked at Blizzard, he worked on an RTS, actually. So there was an interview. I was looking at some of the old interview questions with him yesterday, and somebody said, did you consider working on StarCraft 2? And he said, well, I worked on RTSs before, but they've got people Dustin Brower and other people who are really good at that, and I'm not as good at that, so I took Diablo 3, and I was more than happy to take it. So probably not on StarCraft 2, although I guess that's not entirely out of the question.
But he did work on Company of Heroes, which is one of the most critically acclaimed RTSs. And
yeah, so would it be funny if they suddenly said, hey, Jay's heading up StarCraft 2 expansion number 2? People would be like, what? But I don't think that's going to be happening.
So you think he's moving over to Titan?
Well, that's the whole... I don't know if we want to speculate too much on that because we don't really know anything about it, but I'm sure they'll let us know at some point. I'm sure he's not going to be a game director again. I mean, he just wants to go back and work on games for a while and not be blamed for everything that ever happens, right?
I don't think he'd want to be front of house for a good few years.
If ever, yeah. So it seems like he would be just as good as being a producer on... People have speculated about it being Titan because we don't really know much about that project, including its actual name yet, but... They've said it's going to combine social media and, real-life stuff. And people think the auction house is probably, sort of an indicator of what they might be doing with that game. And obviously Jay has experience with that. Diablo 3's most popular and non-controversial features. That'll be great.
It wouldn't be Blizzard All-Stars, would it?
It seems unlikely. I mean, they've been working on that forever. But it could be some other project we don't even know about yet. I mean, as he said, his seventh year anniversary of Diablo 3 working happened just recently. And this is for a game that was released 8 months ago. So his first 6 years and 4 months were before the game was released, and 3.5 years of that before it was even announced. So yeah. He could be working on some project we don't find out about until 2017 at this point. It wouldn't be a total shock knowing Blizzard.
So what do you think to the reaction to his moving off the project was probably quite predictable, but what...
Yeah, very positive. A lot of well-wishers. People seem really happy to see him go. Wish they love Diablo 3. No complaints. Rob Pardo made a post just now about that, I believe, right?
Yeah, he was a bit shocked at the response on the Battle.net forums in the actual thread where Jay said that he was stepping away from the D3 project. I think the thread started off okay. There was a few sort of oh, thank God for that type of things, but you expect that on the Battle.net forums, but then I think overnight the thread has degenerated into a bit of a cesspit of catchphrases, shall we say.
It's turned ugly and cruel, and you wish you hadn't woken up next to it.
Yeah.
Which sounds like most of my recent dating experiences.
It's horrid, really. I mean, on one of our threads, I just noticed when we were talking before starting to record this, I'm going to have to go and clean it up. It's all very well having an opinion on the game and saying I think it's the right move that he moves away from the project and somebody else comes in to lead it up. But some of the comments, they're just really nasty, uncalled for personal things. It's just horrid. I don't know where people... Would they say that in the room if they were sat there in front of the guy? Would they say the things that they say on our site and Battle.net? I doubt it.
Well, that's the whole point of the internet, right? Is, the anonymity enables people to say things they would never say in person. I mean, Bashiok's posted about that in community manager posts and stuff. People are like, how do you take your job? People are so mean to you. What happens when you meet them in person? And it's like, oh, they're very nice.
Yeah.
But, everyone's is a big, brave, shoot from the hip, radical, angry commenter on the internet, and you meet someone in person. It's like, oh, hi, I like the game. Anyway, so Jay is not leaving the company. He is working on another project, and he's not leaving Diablo 3 even immediately. As they said, he's sort of staying in the position to help them transition to someone new, and who that's going to be, we don't know. We can probably speculate on that a little bit at the end of this podcast. But as we said, he worked on the game for over 6 years before it was even released, and one of the posts, I put up a thread saying, what do you think about this for a voting post on the main page, and right now it's running. When I last looked, it was running neck and neck between horrible job and we don't know what he did because everything is internal politics, which is not entirely a glowing appraisal. But some of the comments I thought were useful. People said, yeah, true, we don't really know, and it's all, we don't know how much of what anyone says is PR and what decisions in the game were Jay's and what were kind of forced on him and what were consensus, etc. But all that said, he was the game director, and the buck has to stop somewhere. So. Apparently it stops at Rob Pardo, apparently, by his last comment. But Jay was the game director, and if you don't like something in the game, then I think it's fair to blame him for it. I wouldn't necessarily bring up his dietary preferences in the post.
No, it's pretty much the same. I put the same vote up on our Facebook page as well, and actually it's unanimously that he did a bad job on the Facebook. Oh. I think they're a lot harsher on Facebook. Which is funny, because everyone obviously posts some votes under their real name. Yeah, that's ironic. Maybe they're trying to impress their friends. Well, people going to our fan site are still somewhat involved in the game. Maybe people on Facebook just get a notification of it, and they don't even really pay attention to Diablo 3 anymore. It's like, oh, good, Jay Wilson left, F that loser. And yes, we'll get to that topic in a minute here. Going back a little, had you heard of Jay Wilson before he was at Blizzard, and when did you first ever hear his name? I guess that was at 2008 when you were at the Worldwide Invitational? Yeah, that was the first time I've heard of him. Certainly not the first time I've heard of his games. So had you played any of his previous titles before his Blizzard experience? No. Or you just knew about them? No, I knew of the games. I knew of Homeworld 1 because a lot of people I knew used to play that and thought it was excellent. But he made Homeworld 2. He was involved in Homeworld 2, which I don't know. But I know a lot of people liked Homeworld 1, and I never hear anyone say anything bad about Warhammer or Company of Heroes. So I knew those games, but I hadn't played those myself. So just looking at our wiki page, which is at diablowiki.net/jwilson, which has been getting tons of hits lately, actually. I'm surprised. It's actually like the #1 Google reply if you look at Jay Wilson. It's got 139,000 views, this page does. Which makes me a little wish I'd put the links in the proper formatting earlier. But anyway, good thing you fixed that. Anyway, he worked 1998, Blood 2. He was a game concept and lead designer. Then he worked on King's Quest, Impassable Creatures, Homeworld 2. Kind of his biggest thing before this, he was Warhammer 40K, Dawn of War. And then he was the senior designer on Company of Heroes, which came out in 2006. And he was hired immediately after that to work on Diablo 3, to head up the Diablo 3 project at Blizzard Irvine, after the early Blizzard North version was finally sort of shelved and restarted. And Jay says in some quotes that are also on that wiki page that they sought him out. I mean, Rob Pardo interviewed him, and Jay said it was awesome. He was an idol of mine. It was great to meet Rob Pardo at Blizzard. And they just kept coming after him, and Jay said he went to the first BlizzCon in October 2005, and talked to them again, and they said, I guess they gave him a presentation. Here's what we have of Diablo 3, and it's getting shut down at Blizzard North is getting shut down, and we're going to restart it. We want someone to run it, and here's your chance to run everything. And Jay's like, how can I refuse? How could he? With a Big Mac? No, of course not. Yeah, so and as far as we knew, when you first saw him in 2008, I mean, he seemed like he was doing a good job with it. Really, it's hard to know what he's doing or what anyone's doing there at that point, but he talked, and he was pretty forthcoming, and he had good information, and everybody was really positive about Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. And he looked fresh-faced and eager and still had color in his cheeks. And no gray in his beard. No, he looked healthy and, And tanned and rested and ready. Yeah. So we actually, I made a note to mention that, as we used to joke about, we would see him, he'd surface like Puxatawny Pete, every 8 months, and you'd see his shadow and go back into the ground. But you'd only see him at a convention, or hey, he's doing a PR sweep through Korea. Here's 5J interviews with obscure Korean sites this week, and we'd always joke to each other and on the site about how the crunch mode was going based on how tired Jay looked. Yeah.
And we'd see him at some of these like Gamescom or something, and he'd be, 4 days of stubble, and his hair looked like it had gone through a blender, and he'd have like bags under his eyes. Like, oh man, they must be working really hard lately. He looks like hell. Yeah. And then you'd see him 6 months later at BlizzCon, and he would have a smile and look relaxed. Like, oh, good, he's had a little time off lately. And he's aged approximately 22 years in the last 6 years, it seems like. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's a tough job leading up a project like this, and obviously since release, where he thought probably things would get a little easier, and this would be the polish and the refining of the project, it actually probably turned into a bit of a living nightmare.
Yeah, when I was looking at some of the interviews of him, some of the ones from early May of last year, when they were kind of, they'd gone gold, they had a couple of weeks to relax, he had a vacation, and everyone was all excited. Diablo 3 is coming out on May 15th. It was released, and the servers first crashed, of course, at 12:02 a.m. on May 16th, or 15th, I guess. And we had, what was it, error 37 or 307 or whatever?
Yeah,
I forget.
37.
Yeah, and then, so, right, like May 14th was like the happiest they ever were. All these years of labor, the fans are really excited. There's this huge, people are waiting. They know they've got, 8 million pre-orders or in the bank or something. And then it came out and there were technical problems, and people weren't negative about the game, as I recall, initially. It was all tech problems, and I can't connect to Battle.net, and why is there an online-only requirement on this? Do you recall when you first started to hear people bitching about the game and saying it's all Jay's fault a couple months later?
No, I think it was a bit quicker than that.
Yeah.
And then there was the big, oh my God, I've been hacked. Blizzard's, it was...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everyone had been hacked, and it was all Blizzard's fault.
And funny how no one authenticator ever got hacked that way, but we don't want to dig that whole debate up again. That was a month of that. Yeah, like the first real complaint that I recall was the items. They put the items on their website, the legendaries and the sets, and many people, including some of the posts on our site, were like, these are boring and terrible, and why aren't they better? And Jay or other people were like, well, we're going to fix them. These are just the temp versions. And then that was basically what the game came out with, and it wasn't until a couple of patches down the road when legendaries became, legendary. But, who knows how much involvement with that Jay had. He was doing tons of other stuff, and it's a big project, and there's hundreds of developers, et cetera. So, you don't want to blame him for everything, but you don't want to, the buck has to stop somewhere, right?
Well, yeah, it does, but it's difficult because we've seen the new job description has gone up today, or a few hours ago.
Yeah, they just posted the game director position opening, which they said they would be. And you want to mention that people, it's our top news post right now as we're speaking, but obviously it's available for anyone. You want to say what's on there? I mean, it looks like a lot of stuff other than game design.
Well, there's not much sitting down coding, is there?
I don't think there's any sitting down coding.
And perhaps that's what he likes. Perhaps that's what he prefers, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's probably why he's not going to be a game director on some other project, and not even to be cruel and say they wouldn't hire him because he was terrible or anything. I mean, who knows? Obviously, Rob Pardo made a very supportive post, and Diablo 3 sold 11 million copies, so they can't be too unhappy with everything. But I remember talking to Max and Eric and the Schaefers and other people from Blizzard North after that company shut down. After they left Blizzard North anyway in 2003, and they were like, we don't want to run another huge company. We just want to make games. And then, of course, they immediately did that with Flagship. It had lots of regrets. And now they moved on to Runic, and they, Schaefer's at least, are much happier with a 30-person company and no overhead and no PR and all this other stuff. And it seems like if you look at this job director responsibility, direct game design while partnering with production directors, evangelize the player community, establish and maintain a creative environment, resolve personnel challenges. So, somebody's bitching about how their cubicles doesn't have enough air conditioning and the guy in the art department's noisy, and Jay's got to go do that, when he wants to work on barbarian skills or something. Yeah. Maintain an awareness of global player behavior and customs to ensure that design decisions are relevant for the majority of regions. I mean, what does that even mean? Like, you have to balance, okay, everybody on Asian realm is cheating with a wizard skill, so we have to change that, but we can't because no one in North America is using it that way. And it just seems like a lot of boss headache. I wouldn't want the job.
As a coach and guide creative team members towards achieving their career goals. I mean, it's a pretty
personnel management.
Yeah, it's a very broad set of responsibilities, isn't it? And there seems to maybe it's just not his bag, all that, and it takes maybe he's better at the just purely being creative.
Well, he did 7 years of doing it, and I could see someone burning out on that. I was looking at the Diablo 2 stuff. And, Diablo 2's lead designers, they didn't have an actual game director title, I don't believe. But You know, it was like Dave Brevik and Max Schaefer. And then Diablo 2 expansion was Tyler Thompson, who was one of the programmers. Because the guys had been doing Diablo 1 and then Diablo 2 for 5 years, and they didn't want to continue heading up a huge urgent crunch mode. They wanted to do something else. So I would assume that the Diablo 3 expansion, the first expansion, has been under production forever. And they probably got a sub-team working on that. And whoever was running that, you know, lead designer or whatever, lead producer, whatever the title is was not Jay and was never going to be Jay, because he was doing all this other overhead stuff and couldn't concentrate on one thing to that extent, and he just needed a break. You can't keep doing the same game forever through every expansion.
No.
And someone will probably post a comment saying the same person's done every Warcraft expansion that way, and I'll be wrong, but I would bet they probably hand that one off as well, and different people take the lead on different stuff.
Do you think that when the systems were radically changed, like no attribute points and the skills set up how they were, do you think any of those ideas that Jay in his position didn't actually agree with, let's say, the attribute points? I mean, all publicly, they all get behind whatever idea is out there and is said to be in the game. They all say, oh, no, we think this is fantastic, blah, blah, adds this, depth, blah. But do you think every single thing that has gone in the game, that, because obviously every single idea isn't his, but do you think he was behind every single idea? Or do you think there'd be a point where maybe no, I don't really agree with that, but it would go into the game just by general consensus?
I don't think there's any way that's not the case. I mean, you know, they have lots of different competing agendas, and maybe something's not your favorite thing, but other people can. I guess it depends on what stage of the agreement are you in. I mean, I think there's probably nothing in the game that he totally hates and really wishes wasn't there. But there's probably lots of stuff that he was a little more about. You know, you can get talked into something, or your initial. You know, you can argue against something in a creative endeavor with multiple people, and then come around eventually and say, okay, I guess that is a good idea now that you've explained it this way, or I can see how it has its pros and cons, or whatever.
And then it turns out to be not such a good idea, and the blame lies at your feet, and you think, God, I should have listened to my gut. I knew that wasn't right.
One thing that I know for sure from a semi-inside source is that I don't know this for sure, but I mean, I was told this and it seems reasonable, but right before the game came out, there was the whole thing where they had a strike team from World of Warcraft came and played stuff, and they were the head evangelists over the skill revamping system, where initially we just had sort of a big menu. Well, not initially, they had 40 iterations, but I mean, right during the early beta, you just had a big menu of like all 27 or 30 skills for your character, and you could choose whichever.
Yeah.
And that's when they redid the whole thing to make these 6 categories, you know, offensive, defensive, and secondary, and other things. And if you don't enable the, what's it called? Elective mode.
Yeah.
If you don't enable elective mode, you can only do one skill from each thing, and they're mapped, you know, to your 1, 2, 3, 4, or left mouse or right mouse. And that was very much what the World of Warcraft developers thought. They thought that the skill system needed more structure and more organization, and it needed to kind of guide players through it. And they did not even want the elective mode. They were you have to play with these skills in this way or else. That's your only option to play it. And Jay and some of the other people on the D3 team were very much against that mandatory system, and they pushed to get the elective mode enabled. And that's why it's just kind of tacked on as an option that didn't even have a tooltip for quite a while. So in theory, without Jay, we would have been stuck with this just 6 skills thing. And I think that would have been a huge, angry player outcry. You know, you're dumbing down the game, you're locking us into this stupid system. I want to use 3 skills from this category, why can't I, etc. I'm sure there are many other examples, probably damn near everything in the game, you could have a story like that if we got a real behind-the-scenes account, which we never will. But yeah, that's at least one thing that I think of that I'm pretty certain about, that Jay actually did make a decision that I think is very good and agree with.
But I guess at the end of the day, the buck stops with him, and even if he was sort of convinced to go down different routes that turned out to be wrong and perhaps were against his initial instincts, it's still, he's the guy that signs off and says, right, this is the route we're taking. So any of the failings the game have to lie at his feet, but also any of the successes in it have to be attributed to him just as much then, in the same way, I mean.
Yeah, I'm sure he cashed his royalty checks, you know. He might have disagreed with a few features, but you know, the game was successful in sales, certainly. Obviously, a lot of the hardcore fans are less than enchanted at this point. But then kind of one thing he did do that was universally unpopular was a certain Facebook post. And the scenario was, it was Chris Haga, who was one of the developers on Diablo 3 and one of the main guys doing some of the skill stuff, had left the company shortly after launch and started up his own smaller project with some friends. And on his Facebook page, there was an interview with Dave Brevik, conducted by someone that you and I both know pretty well.
Yes.
Our friend Rush, who runs IncGamers, and had talked to Dave at, what was it, some European game show he talked to Dave at?
Yeah, Gamescom last year in Germany.
And he asked him some questions. What do you think about Diablo 3? And Dave Brevik basically said, it's really good in some ways, and there's some things I wouldn't have done. And, like he wasn't a fan of the auction house, which was obviously a pretty common opinion. And he basically said something to the effect of, it's really shows you what a great team we had on Diablo 2, and you see how well that game worked out.
Mm.
And it didn't seem like he meant that as a backhanded insult sort of thing. But that's definitely how Chris Haga took it. As I recall, his Facebook post said something like, why do I feel like I've just been thrown under a bus? And a bunch of other Blizzard people chimed in and said, yeah, that wasn't really cool, and he's insulting the Diablo 3 team. And then what did Jay Wilson say in that comment thread?
I think he said, F that loser.
Except he didn't say F, he said the real word.
Oh,
but,
no.
We can't say that because it's shocking to ears.
Yeah, because all the people in the Diablo community would never use such language.
Jay thought that this was a private Facebook page that nobody could see who wasn't on Chris Haga's friends list or whatever. I'm not a big Facebook user, but and I don't know the terminology. But I mean, my main point, if anyone listening to this podcast or reading our website has not said unkind things about their critics or complainers while speaking to friends in what you thought was a private venue, I will. Slice my keyboard into wafers, season it with Tabasco sauce, eat it with cheddar cheese and a nice glass of Sauvignon Blanc. So, Jay did nothing that we all haven't done 1,000 times. He just got caught. So,
yeah.
And obviously you can say he has got a higher, it's worse if a police officer gets caught using drugs than a regular person, because there's a level of trust with your job and responsibility, and that's why politicians get hounded out of office for affairs, that kind of thing. Mm. So, obviously you can say, okay, there's a higher standard of behavior online for Jay Wilson. I mean, we were just reading the game director responsibilities, and it's foster a global climate of positive communication, etc. And I don't think F that loser really fits into a positive international community of commentary, etc.
There was plenty of people in Blizzard who liked that comment, and other people who agreed with the sentiment. So they may have not said it, but they weren't shy in saying, absolutely, yeah, I agree with you. F that loser.
If people look back at the original post of that, we'll put a link to it in this update. There's screenshots of the Facebook page, and everyone's like, oh yeah, great comment, Jay, and LOL and stuff. Yeah. So he was, I think, obviously trying to. A
lot of them have been deleted, though, the comments.
Yeah.
From the other.
Funny how that works.
Mm.
Well, I mean, this was. Like, what, August or so? I mean, it was after several months of Diablo 3, and they'd obviously seen a lot of criticism and a lot of commentary, and people saying that the game sucked and that the developers were horrible, and Jay is the head of the team, and here's one of his former team members posting this, saying, why do I feel like I've been thrown under a bus? And Jay obviously wanted to say, hey, I support you guys, and I think it was unfair, and I don't agree with him.
Mm.
And maybe he should have put a couple of paragraphs.
Maybe he should have just put that.
Yeah, well, maybe it was also, as I recall, it was a late Sunday night post, and I don't know if he was drunk dialing, who knows what he was doing at that point, but he was definitely off duty and probably feeling a little freer with his comments. And as you say, the other people enjoyed the commentary, and they're like, oh, great comment, Jay, that was funny, and probably not, everyone thought it was a private conversation, so. But anyway, that blew up into a huge public thing, and we weren't the only ones or the first ones to report upon it. Although it got around everywhere, and it became a huge commentary thing. And there was a lot of people. I think some people were legitimately offended or upset that he would say that, and especially about Dave Brevik, who was pretty much the creator of the whole Diablo series. At the same time, there were a lot of people who were pearl clutching, as they say, and fainting couching, and. Mm. People who use that word 500 times a day online, in every comment thread, and et cetera. And, oh, my God, I'm so offended that Jay Wilson said something that I've said 1,000,000 times.
Some of the more sensible people, rational people, reacted to it in not just Jay's comment, but the other people at Blizzard who reacted supporting the comment and the sentiment. And this was the culture that was at Blizzard. This is how they reacted to things. This is how they truly thought of people on the outside criticizing their game, when they obviously present themselves as, we listen to criticism, we want to hear the feedback, we need we really appreciate your feedback. And then someone gives feedback, someone who's well qualified to give feedback, and their reaction, not just Jay's, but the people who said it, was, fuck you. Which is completely contradictory to what they're presenting. So I think people who looked at it in rather than knee-jerk sort of, oh God, I've never been so offended, people who actually looked at it and thought about it thought, that's a shitty culture there in Blizzard, if that's how they react truly to things.
And of course there's a different reaction to, with your friends. I mean, he wouldn't have said that publicly, obviously. He didn't mean to say it publicly.
No, but this was to people, and the people supporting him and liking his comment. This was to people who knew David, people in the industry, people who had worked with him, people who may still be working with him, and they not forget the outside people. This is within the clique of Blizzard and ex-Blizzard and what have you. They said that in the knowledge that people who had worked with David or knew him still, or may in the future, because it's a small industry, they were quite happy to support Jay's comment and say, nice one, Jay. That's the thing that I found more shocking. Jay's comment was a knee-jerk sort of like, ugh. But everyone else, the comments afterwards supporting it was more considered, I thought. And I thought that was more off than actually Jay's sort of, we've all said things and that they've come out before we've thought of them.
Yeah, I'm actually skimming. I'm looking at the post right here and skimming over the afterwards comments.
It was cleaned up, apart from the one about IncGamers.
Her first comment was, "Oh, IncGamers, paragons of objectivity."
Mm.
Her second comment was, "Can I like Jay's comment more than once, please?"
Mm.
So she was all in on that one, obviously.
Yeah, I actually use that as an endorsement now on our Twitter.
Yeah.
For IncGamers, Diablo, and I put in inverted commas, paragon of objectivity in then Blizzard Entertainment.
And people actually, our comment thread got a bunch of comments about that. People saying that's crazy because you guys are the only objective fan site because you actually say the pros and the cons.
Well, see, the thing was, Paul obviously was there as a general news site for IncGamers.com, but obviously as he's involved with the Diablo site, David knew that he was going to ask more probey questions because Paul's there, within the community. He knows what gripes are within the community and what the problems are, more so than just a lot of the general reporters who just get the general opinion. And he'd said before the camera started rolling, I'd like you to be as honest as possible. Because he's done so many of these interviews where you just get the same old PR baloney trolled out. Oh, we're very supportive of the title and it's moved on fantastically and we think they've done a fantastic job, yada yada. No one wants to hear that. They want to hear what you actually really think. And so that's why he probed a bit further.
Probably one of the many reasons Dave Brevik is happy he does not work for Blizzard anymore. He can actually give honest answers to interviews and create controversies. And Max and Eric do much the same thing, and all of the other people do. I was thinking it would have been interesting if Jay had actually left Blizzard, because maybe he would have been able to say some stuff that he'll never say now while still working there. And he would have, even if not about Diablo 3, just being able to talk to fans and talk to media and not talk with his Twitter feed and not have to always be controlled and following the PR line and stuff.
I don't know. I mean, I think Max does it a bit more. I mean, he did it even when he was at Blizzard North, didn't he? I think he didn't put his foot in it, but I think Max. But
there's a big difference between Blizzard North and Blizzard Irvine, though. But at least there was.
As far as if Jay had left Blizzard, if he would speak frankly about things in a little bit of time, I don't think he would be the sort of person who would. He's not. I don't think he's a different creature to Max. I think Max is sort of a bit more out there.
Well, I don't think Jay would have talked about his time at Blizzard so much. Maybe going into the future, he could have talked more openly and honestly about stuff and not had to be so PR sensitive all the time. Although, of course, our last 10 minutes are about how he was so not PR sensitive, but
yeah,
accidentally, obviously.
Yeah.
Personally, I think he just pounded when he typed that. It was late Sunday night. It was like a midnight post, and he'd probably had a fun weekend, and the kid was in bed, and he'd been up late with his wife drinking some wine, and said, "Hey, let's go on the internet." Oh God, another sniping critic, and he probably typed it in 1 second.
Yeah.
it's a shame that this happens to a lot of people. Obviously, you do something in the heat of the moment, and it affects the rest of your life, or the rest of your relationship, or ends your marriage, or.
And it's followed him around ever since, isn't it? Really, it's anything from him. There's always, even on their own Facebook, there's always someone pops up and says "F that loser" to him.
Yeah, it's funny. He did spawn a number of catchphrases. I mean, we took that and doubled it is constantly being used as a joke about Diablo.
Yeah. And
he used to always say everything was awesome, and so that's people are always saying make it awesome. But then Bashiok kind of echoed that, and now it's become kind of a Bashiok meme. Whatever happened to Bashiok, by the way? He left the company too, right? Oh no, he moved to another project.
He went back to WoW.
It's funny the two most visible people on the Diablo, I mean, for most fans, are no longer on Diablo. Whatever that.
They probably get burnt out on the Diablo community. I mean, it's a baptism of fire, isn't it? When you get thrown in on the Diablo community, you've got to be made of tough stuff.
They get burned out in effigy, actually, not just in reality. And speaking of other people and going forward, there's been a lot of speculation about who might be the new game director. I mean, obviously they've posted it publicly, but that doesn't mean they don't have internal candidates in mind. People have mentioned Wyatt Chang a lot, who's kind of been the second most heard from developer in terms of these blogs and explaining new features and such. And, for many reasons we've said earlier, I don't think I would want Wyatt to do it, because he seems to be one of the most active developers, and he's coming up with the cool features and doing, if he's doing the game director, then he's not really doing the game developer. And it seems like he's doing a really good job as a game developer. Maybe you want someone who's more, the Rob Pardo types, who are sort of executive overseers, but they're not really, nitty-gritty so much anymore.
Probably, yeah. I think it would be better to get somebody internally than externally. Because they're
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Well, maybe you want someone new to come in and be a fresh start and a new set of eyes. And I mean, plenty of people in our comment thread say things like they should cancel the expansions and just make Diablo 4 now because Diablo 3 is hopelessly beyond reclamation, which I think is ludicrously untrue. But they're obviously, I think they're going to press forward and make expansions, and they've got a 10 million player base that want to buy the next game from them. But they can't. It seems like they can't make any huge overhauls to how the item system works or anything like that until they get an expansion. Partially because of the whole real money auction house thing. People have so much actual money tied up in their items, there'd be massive outrage if they became devalued. And so maybe what will happen is we'll get the expansion, and that'll be like a parallel thing, where you can continue playing the original game without the new stuff if you want to. And if you go to the expansion, you'll know that all the new items are going to be there, and everything you currently have is going to become valueless, or next to it.
But if you brought somebody in from the outside, how long? That's going to disrupt the schedule, isn't it? Surely.
Well, there's a learning curve, but this is the best time to have that learning curve because they're not talking about the expansion yet. So, they're just managing patches. They're kind of continuing with what they've been doing, incremental changes, adding some new stuff here and there. And maybe you bring someone new in to be the game director who heads up the expansion, and that becomes what the main game director's doing. And you get fresh blood and a new set of eyes, and then Max Schaefer kicks ass. No, wait, probably not. Yeah, we were joking. What if they hired Dave Brevik for this job? The internet would explode.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know when we'll find out who the new person is, but I assume they're going to be pushing full steam ahead to get that post filled ASAP.
Well, you'd certainly, Jay is transitioning off of it and helping out, so it's not like the game is without direction and is foundering hopelessly. I mean, as you said, 107 testing continues, and the patch is going to come out when it comes out, so... Anyway, so we went about half an hour here. That was our goal. Any last thoughts on this?
Just looking forward to getting a new director in.
And you got to wonder what whoever's going to take this job now, looking at how it took 20 years off of Jay Wilson's life in 3 years, and the complaints and this huge, vociferous, fanatical fan community who pick over every single thing for pros and cons, and mostly cons. And you don't get a lot of Twitters from people who like a feature or who are indifferent. You hear from people who hate it. So it's not an easy job, and that's why you get the big bucks. Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see who takes the post.
Who gets nominated for it and can't turn it down. As Jay said, he couldn't turn it down. And obviously, if the game is popular, it's great, And yes, I guess you can say Jay Berman himself by making a game that wasn't universally loved.
But it was...
Could it ever be universally loved?
The post at that point was a lot more attractive than it is now. It was like making Diablo 3, which is obviously on the back of the hugely successful 1 and then 2. Now it's taking on a game that has been not so well received, and the post that certainly is not a very nice post to be in this situation. So it's not as attractive. So they'll have to make the package. They'll have to be super attractive package, or have incredibly thick skin, or be so arrogant that they think, I can turn this crowd around, no problem.
Well, there's no history of arrogance at Blizzard, so I think we can rule the last one out. Okay, maybe we should close on that note. Well, good luck to whoever takes the job, and we look forward to seeing it.
And I hope Jay fits better in his, or has more success in his next role in the company, even though I think he made some fundamental mistakes. It's been a pretty tough ride for him, I think.
Okay, you've been listening to the Diablo podcast. We are online at DiabloIncGamers.com, and we'll be back with a regular game-focused podcast fairly soon. Good luck, Jay.
Bye.
Bye.
Boo.